All right, welcome to the 2021 Department of Energy Early Career Awards kickoff. This will be the first of two kickoffs. This first one will pretty much focus on, it will just be a quick kickoff that kind of focuses on the preliminary application, which, as it turns out, is due 1 week from today. So I'm presuming, for the most part, this is going to kind of cover what should be expected for those that might be able to catch some of this next week. But also, the focus will be that even if you get the preliminary in, you wouldn't hear back for another month. And in that month's time frame, you really should be working on your full application in some sense. And that's kind of what I'm going to talk about. My name is Quinn Wickham. I'm proposal manager out of the Knowledge Enterprise Research Development Office. I have with me today two guests that I'll provide some, we'll kind of just have a discussion with them towards the end. Ann Jones, Associate Professor in the School of Molecular Sciences, and Gary Moore, Assistant Professor, also in the School of Molecular Sciences. So I'll start with a brief introduction of the program, kind of walk through a calendar of how you should prepare for this award, talk a little bit about the pre-application, then we'll get into the discussion that is sort of the experiences of our two guests here. So this application, all the information about this, where the award information is on the DOE website. It's actually the science.osdi.gov, early career. And they have a lot of information there, including the past awardees, which is something I'll mention later on. So what you get out of this particular career award is that it is for tenure-track researchers only. For this particular round, you need to have received your doctorate no earlier than 2010. And the award ceiling is $750,000 for 5 years. They expect to offer about 45 or so awards to universities for this round. So besides sort of the eligibility that I just talked about, which is pretty general, the next thing to really focus on is the fit. As far as early careers go, this is very prescribed in terms of what they're looking for. And they make a great deal of that in the solicitation. So you have to read the topic descriptions in the solicitation very carefully. While these are the funding programs, they've added a couple beyond what they did from last year. Again, the details are in the solicitation, and they tell you both what they're looking for, and they often tell you what they're not looking for in the solicitation. They also provide information in the solicitation about things like the DOE reports that talk about sort of the things that they're looking for. But it's also good to go to these particular program websites and kind of learn a little bit about the program itself. So with this particular program, full applications can be submitted up to 3 times, while you're sort of in that pre-tenure stage. And you can submit the preliminaries as many as you need to get to the full 3 opportunities that you have. One thing to keep in mind that it is about development of individual research programs. So this is just about you as an investigator, not necessarily bringing in co-investigators, something like that. It's just your program. So the due dates, again, I mentioned that it's from a week of this presentation is pre-application due date. The encouraged, discouraged date, they are expecting to be around the mid-December, 7th of December, and the full application will be due in February. So with that in mind, let's kind of walk through a calendar of how you can sort of prepare for this or think about preparing for this. One thing, just kind of keep an assumption, if you are going to be applying to the pre-application, you've got to be registered in the PAM system. So that's where the pre-application will go into. The full application actually goes through your research administrator. So the November, again, you should be well ahead on this stage, but it is really reading carefully the solicitation, RFA, review criteria, reviewing these references, updating your collaborators and co-editors list. You don't really want to keep that for the last minute because that does need to go in with this. Write the 3 pages, and that 3 pages has to include references. So keep that in mind. And then you'll be submitting on that Friday through the PAM system. So that doesn't mean once you get it submitted, it doesn't mean you just sit around until December 17th. Really, you should start building up your program. So preparing for the invitation is to start expanding the proposal. Even like I said, if you don't get invited this time, you're going to get feedback on it. You'll be able to submit again. This is also the time to do research and read sort of the previous awards to kind of get a sense of what's been awarded before. Find the mentors, which I will talk about shortly, and you need to think about the calendar, how you're going to plan this out over the next couple of months. And usually I would say to develop a proposal checklist and shell document, but Jeannie Wilson in our office has actually made those, and we're happy to share them out. So that's something you can request. I'll give you email information at the end for that. So that's December, January. It's really about, by then you would have heard, presuming that you have been invited. You'll be, of course, writing. Attending the early career kickoff, which again, I'm planning for about the week of January 4th. Setting up some review sessions or setting up meetings basically with sort of those mentors I'm going to talk about, or any other people who might be able to actually look at your proposal and review them, and then start some regular meetings with a research administrator. And all this is in preparation for the submission, of course, in February. So it's kind of a broad overview of how you want to think about the next couple of months. So I mentioned the previous awardees. That's a great resource and to kind of see what has been awarded out there in the past, and those are provided on the website. It's also a way you can kind of think about making some contacts. You might be able to bring people in to help review some of your awards. It can be kind of a, to sort of cold call somebody to ask them if you can either see a reward or have them look at yours. It can be difficult, but really somebody who has received one of these previously is one of the best reviewers that you can get. So something that I like to talk about in terms of, I call it building a network. It's really about sort of getting mentors that can help you through this process. So the most common one that most faculty think of is what I would call the technical mentor. This is somebody who knows your science. They know your field. It's somebody you tend to talk to a lot, which is great. This is an important part of somebody who can actually review the proposal. But you want to also make sure that you pull somebody in who knows the agency. And that's what I kind of call a process mentor. And this doesn't necessarily have to be somebody who knows your field, but they really need to know DOE in this case. So one of the things you have to keep in mind when you're thinking about putting in proposals, you're selling your science, but you really have to know who you're selling it to. And that's where sort of the process mentor, somebody who really knows the agency, can help with. If you have a cure for cancer, you could sell it till you're blue, but the National Science Foundation just isn't going to be interested. It just matters who you're selling it to in this case, and they're going to know that process of what the DOE is looking for. So in terms of preliminary application, some quick things that matter in this sense is obviously the relevant topic, but also is the publication success. They are going to want to know that you've had sort of a good start to your career where you've been able to put some of your research into publications. The review criteria for the pre-application, number one is being the most important, that you're responsive to the objective solicitation, that you're answering exactly what they're asking for, that you have that sort of merit, scientific technical merit, the approaches are good, the impact, scientific impact. And the last thing they mention is a diverse pool of applicants, which you don't necessarily have control over, but it's a good thing to kind of keep in mind. All right, with that, what I want to do is just kind of turn to Gary and Ann, and I'm going to stop sharing here. And I have a few questions for you. I'm going to kind of start with sort of the kind of more of a kind of preliminary and kind of go deeper from that. So my first question to you is, did you submit more than once, either pre-application and or full application? And if so, what did you learn, especially from the review feedback that you've gotten? So maybe, Anne, I'll just start with you.
Thank you, Quinn. It's really nice to be able to work with you today. I'm excited to see more people from ASU submit applications. The DOE Early Career Award was actually created when I was a junior faculty member. So it was a new thing when I first, around the time I started at ASU. And so I submitted the first year it existed. And was not selected that year, and got really excellent reviews. They actually targeted on one of the things you mentioned in your presentation, that my project was an interesting project, but it was one that they felt had too much collaboration. They wanted to see how I could develop that project to further my own career. And so I took that feedback and thought about how to bring all of the project in-house, rewrote it the next year, and it was then funded.
Great, thank you. Gary?
Yeah, it's nice to be here as well. It's nice to participate in this event. I also had submitted several times. My third application was successful. My first application received the highest scores nonetheless. So it goes to show that it's not just always about the scores that you get from your reviewers. And I think resonating with what Ann said, being mapped onto what the Department of Energy is interested in funding, and in particular what captures the attention and direction of the particular program that you're applying to.
Mm-hmm. Did you, so Gary, did you, this was your third full application. Did you submit any other preliminary applications that didn't get invited to full, or were you always invited to full?
No, in all cases, they were invited to full and went out to review. And in most cases, the reviews actually came back pretty good, but this is a highly competitive award. And so it's a tough one to crack into.
That's great. All right. So my next question is did you make contact with the program officer before you submitted? And Gary, I'll let you start off with that.
Yeah, absolutely. I would think in all cases, it's really important to have interaction with the program officer. I was somewhat fortunate in this case that the program officer and I have known each other for several years now through interactions at conferences and things of that nature. So we had a fairly good rapport and communication. But yeah, I think it's absolutely critical.
Yeah, and
I agree with Gary wholeheartedly. I mean, I was in the opposite situation that my program officer was someone that before the award I'd never met. I cold called him. It was actually a cold email, but DOE program managers have usually a really regimented process. Like they know people are going to contact them with project ideas, so that typically on the program's website, there's instructions about like sometimes even what times of year you can contact them with project ideas and how to do it. And so I did that, right? I sent him the required documentation to pitch ideas, and then I called him and pitched 3 different ideas for a proposal and got, excellent feedback in terms of what that program is interested in, because as Gary said, a large part is crafting a project that really addresses the specific issues of that program. DOE is a mission-driven agency, and if your project is not within the purview of the mission they're trying to achieve, it's not something they can fund. So it needs to be energy related, even though it's basic science, right? And in line with the priorities that they care about, so that even more than many other funding agencies, you really should get in contact with the program managers.
Great. Yeah, that's great to know. What about preliminary data? Is that something that, I'll start with you, Anne. Do you feel like we had preliminary data coming in?
Yes. And I think that very few of these are funded without any preliminary data at all. I'm not going to say that I think that's impossible, but my reviewing experience tells me that's going to be really hard. Certainly the first time I submitted, I had some preliminary data, and then with the feedback that they wanted me to pull more stuff in-house, I then specifically designed experiments in the parts that were kind of newer to my lab to get preliminary data in those areas as well, so that I could have a compelling argument that I can be successful in the things that maybe people didn't know me for in advance. And I think you do want to do that strategically. Once you get that review, if it's not funded the first time, you can definitely use that to plan your experiments that become the preliminary data in the next round.
Right. I guess, Gary, you would have had time to put some of that together.
Yeah, absolutely. Even beyond preliminary data, it's really going to help if you have a publication even in that area to help cement that this has been vetted and peer reviewed, some of the ideas that you're conveying, and absolutely critical. Again, yeah, it's possible to get one of these funded without it, but I would find that highly difficult and unlikely.
So one of the things that I noticed in the solicitation is that often they list a lot of the Department of Energy reports. And so I'll start with you, Gary. Were you able to make use of those? Did you use those maybe in the proposed law is what I should say.
Reference 1 and 2 usually. Again, going back to just DOE being very mission oriented, they're pretty clear and try to be clear in what their mission is. And so some of these workshops, as well as roundtable events that take place, can be extremely helpful and insightful to get your hands on one of these. Even better is if you can somehow find a way to participate in one and even help in steering some of the conversation and directions up front. So I was fortunate to participate in some roundtable events related to solar photochemistry, which is the area that my award was through. And so those interactions were very insightful.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't know if Anne, when you had that was kind of a part of the solicitation.
Oh, absolutely. DOE has been producing these reports for decades. And as Gary said, yeah, I've been involved in writing a few of them at this point in my career. My personal research area is catalysis, and they refreshed the catalysis report just a few years ago for those who work in that field, and I was part of that committee. They've got an interest in nitrogen transformations as part of that as well. Those reports are super important because they articulate what they call the priority research directions for the entire agency. And so you're looking for those key words in terms of what their priorities are, and you absolutely must articulate a connection between your project and the mission of the agency, and ideally one of those priority directions of the agency. Some of the calls, not the early career award, even explicitly ask you to connect to particular reports. DOE is very much driven in this way. And so those individual programs are rejiggered every few years to address what the current priorities are as well, so that a program manager can tell you which of the priorities in those reports are most important to their program too.
One of the things that I thought was interesting about, I didn't really remember this from the previous solicitation, but it was definitely pointed out as one of the review criteria for this year's was leadership potential. Hmm. And one thing I sort of hear when you're kind of talking about engaging the DOE in terms of, you know, these roundtables and such, that tells me a little bit about probably what they're looking for. But what else would you have? How do you sort of sell your leadership potential in your field in this award?
My impression is that DOE is not looking for the same thing in leadership potential that NSF is, right? This is not like writing a broader impact statement. It is a much more research focused idea, right? Leadership is publishing high quality peer reviewed articles, in high priority, high impact type places, seeing them getting cited. It's pointing out that leadership in the research realm that I think they're really looking for, especially in that career award. They're not looking to know what outreach you're doing with school students. I had a DOE program manager tell me they have no interest in outreach to school students. This is really leadership within the scientific community. They want to see that you are the person to go to in this area of science, right? Which you demonstrate through your scientific output.
So yeah, that makes sense. Do you have any thoughts on that, Gary?
Yeah, no, I agree with everything Ann said in that case. And I did, you're limited in space, of course, and you want to make sure you can clearly articulate your science. But I did dedicate a paragraph to that topic. And as Ann pointed out, there's ways of subtly doing that, even with the references that you include, going back to having preliminary data in publications, if they're in top journals. It's good if you can indicate that you're being invited to give presentations or networked in with the community that's engaged in that research activity. Gordon Research Conferences are one great venue for things like that. They often even have slots for junior and emerging faculty presentation. So things like that, if you can point to those things, it's always kind of embarrassing sometimes to toot your own horn. But I think one paragraph for that can be helpful in this context.
Great, thank you. The next question I have is about sort of consultation during your proposal preparation process. Did you talk to peers? Did you bring in anybody to do reviews? What was sort of your experience in that? And Gary, I'll start with you.
Yeah, and I think you already touched on this, getting both the technical reviewer, but also someone that has some previous engagement with DOE and has an understanding of how that department. In fact, the second one is almost more important. Usually at the point of writing these proposals, you're really the master of your own research. And it's having a better understanding of the organization and how to craft and map on how your research idea fits onto some of these objectives. The other thing that was already mentioned were these basic energy science reports that Ann mentioned as well. And those are extremely helpful. In fact, I have to personally thank Ann. I referenced and used one that she participated in writing in my own proposal efforts. And it was really helpful and insightful to get a sense of what they're thinking about. So yeah, reading those reports and then coupled with reaching out to the program manager, at least in my experience and in others that I've talked to, the program managers love talking with people about their science. It's to hear them describe it, one of the best parts of their job. And so they're usually open to that and pretty transparent.
Great. And how did you sort of reach out and tap into your network?
So I love in your opening presentation the idea of two different kinds of mentors, because I think this is super important. As Gary said, for DOE, it's almost more important to make sure that someone tied into the DOE culture reads it than someone who actually understands the science, because there is so much need to make sure everything meshes with the DOE culture. I mean, I work in a field that's kind of more biologically oriented, and they have really regimented political dividing lines on what kinds of biological work can be done by each program. And if you use the wrong term, you'll immediately be shunned, like it's a politics thing. And so you just need someone who's clued into that culture to be able to say to you, no, they don't use that word, they use this word instead, right? It's the same science, but they use, the right word in this setting. And so I firmly believe in talking with everyone I know about whatever proposal I'm writing at the time. Have your elevator pitch ready, have your whatever question you have about what you're working on that person could help you with. I stop people in the halls. I stop them on the street. I send emails to people I want to read things. I think it's one of the best parts of our jobs, actually. Like, I love reading other people's proposals. I love writing my own. Science is creative, and this is your chance to see it happening and to influence it. So, don't be bashful about asking someone to help read something. They probably want to be quite frank. Yeah.
It's great. Great.
Quinn, can I jump in real quick?
Sure.
I wasn't really planning on doing that. I was just sort of a silent observer, but I think I just want to, first introduce myself. I'm the graphic artist. I work with Quinn on proposal design quite a bit, specifically, providing figures with the concept that we basically try to buff them up and make them and take them out of, out of something that looks like it was, done in high school and bump it up to something that rivals what you might see in a journal. Now, one of the things about the things that I know about and correct me if I'm wrong, but my experience with doing graphics for a DOE is they can and often are a little bit more lenient on other than just very, very simple black and white, and I didn't prepare what I was going to say, so I'm really kind of riffing it here, but the diagrams can become a little bit more, well, like I say, they can be more journal-like, and I've had pretty good luck with that on a couple of DOEs. I'd just like to get some feedback from Gary and Ann about where you feel, is there consideration as far as a graphic aesthetic that you recognize when you're building your proposals?
I can say a few words about that, and I'm not sure how much it related to the success of the proposal, but I can surely say that the third proposal I submitted was by far the most graphically intensive in terms of the time that went into it. And I did reach out for some help at ASU for internal support from artists and helping to convey some of those ideas in a graphically meaningful way. And so I'd like to think that helped. I'm a big fan of artwork myself. Good penmanship and writing never goes out of style, but it's nice to have good figures to go with it too. And I think you can convey a lot with figures and art and graphical representations. And so, yeah, in that third proposal I submitted, there were definitely some figures that were almost artwork rather even than a graph or a plot, but help with conveying ideas.
Oh, that's great. That's good.
Thank you very much, Gary.
Yeah. I don't know. And when you submitted yours, did you have sort of a graphic element you can remember?
Well, I submitted mine in the dark ages, and I'm an electrochemist, so we have pretty boring looking figures, I have to say. But that being said, I do think I have an aesthetic to the way that I do proposals, or at least a kind of framework I work within. Certainly the large collaborative proposals I've been involved in for DOE usually have intensely professional graphics. Especially if you have a national lab collaborator, they probably have a team of people like Michael putting together those graphics. I mean, they will spend months on it. I think that when you're submitting your own individual career award, you probably don't need that level of graphics. But I do in my own proposals try to keep in mind that a picture's worth 1,000 words. I've got limited space. If I can find an appropriate graphic for each page, then I can get a lot more information across than I normally would in my, however many pages I have. And I break up the flow of the document so that it's not so, like when I'm a reviewer and somebody has 5 pages in a row of single-spaced 11-point font text, man, I'm tired by the end of page 5, right? And so just having that visually broken up a little bit, I think makes the reviewer more inclined not to be grumpy by the end of the reading. And obviously you brought up, earlier in the presentation, Quinn, that you have to think about who your audience is. You want your audience to be happy, right? They're gonna write a review of this, so don't exhaust them. So that I try to stick to an approximately a graphic a page in a normal kind of proposal, where there are certain kinds of graphics that I'll try to put into any individual investigator type proposal. Like I really like something like what Michael's describing that's more on the artistic side on page 1, that's really trying to represent all the different ideas I'm trying to get across in the proposal. So it's not trying to be scientific data. It's instead trying to show you what's the gestalt of the proposal. What are the major ideas I'm trying to get across? And what am I going to deliver? Similarly, on the last page, lots of reviewers are going to want to know, how does it all logistically fit together? You can make things like Gantt charts to do that, right? It's not data, but it can be an aesthetically appealing visual representation of logistically how the parts of the proposal fit together, right? They don't need to read 20 pages of exact milestones when they can just look at an exact, you know, an elegant figure. And then I tend to have an aesthetic that's more on the scientific side, more on the sort of, I want the data to be simply presented, especially for preliminary data, right? I want people to be able to evaluate it and say, okay, this is not, you know, her fictional interpretation, because as a reviewer, I know that that data hasn't been through peer review yet. And so I want to look at it critically. And people will give you more benefit of the doubt than they would if it were a paper you were submitting, but they're still looking at it critically. And so I keep that in mind for those kinds of figures, and I leave the more artistic side or the more creative side for then the things about, you know, what I haven't done yet. Here's how it might look, or here's what I will get out of it. I put the artistic ideas into that part of the proposal.
You know, one of the, just to put a bow on all that, you know, one of the interesting things, and I'm really glad you mentioned that you have sat on that side of the table as a reviewer, and you enjoy, you know, the fact that if you are, you've looked through 20 of these things, your eyes are burnt, you know, and here you come across one, and boy, it's like, well, look at, you don't quite know what's different about it, but it's easier to read. There's a little more spacing between, and, you know, and you don't know what sacrifices were made on the other end. What, we've got to cut a paragraph to make this work? That's such a hard sell, but you have just validated how worth it is to have great editing and be able to say, listen, people, you know what, just because you've got maximum guidelines or minimum guidelines, don't, you know, don't play there. You know, it's like play somewhere in the aesthetic middle where, gosh, can I do 1.5 spacing instead of, you know, just, you know, single line? Don't want to do double, you know, but oh boy, if I can get 1.5, talking word terms, you know, if I can get, you know, 1.5 instead of 1, just a little bit more of a gap, little things like that. Now, let me ask you this real quick, Ann. When you review, when you're sitting as a reviewer, are you reviewing digitally, or are you looking at print? Or is it a combination of both?
I used to always do it on print. I used to always review proposals on print. Now I find that I can review on a tablet because I can see the whole page at one time. Because even on a large computer, I don't find looking at an entire page as comfortable. But on a tablet, that works for me. And I like to hand annotate when I review. Mm-hmm. So that I review things an entire page at a time, which is why when I write, I find it really important to think about how the page looks as a unit as well.
I think that it's interesting, these things that when I'm designing graphics and my supervisor, Wendy and I supervisor, Faye Farmer, pushes us to create, presentations much like the one that he presented today, and so I typically do one on graphics, and I'm constantly trying to find ways to sell it to our PIs and our faculty. And one of the latest things that have come up is, you know, ASU really does go out of its way to build these new science buildings. The Biodesign C building, if you guys have not seen it, you know, Google it. It's a work of art. I mean, it is aesthetically stunning. And they're building 2 or 3 more on campus that are just, they are works of art. And it's like, well, why is that? Why do we have to have that building to do science? Why can't we just have a square old building, go with the lowest bid, and build these tiny little closed-in rooms? But because it's the science that we're doing in there, and it's like, these buildings didn't just happen. They didn't just say, oh, we're going to do this. Those buildings are built that way I'm guessing, for several reasons. One, they want the people to walk into them to feel like they are really part of something incredibly special. And so they built this magnificent structure for them to walk into. On the other token, you know, look at Starbucks and their frozen lattes. You know, they're in clear cups. Why are they in clear cups? They want you to see what it is you're buying because you're spending money on that. And if it was in a closed off cup that you couldn't see, yeah, you might still get it. But the fact when they hand that across the counter to you and it's all swirly and frilly and beautifully stylized, you feel like you're getting something. You're getting a lot more than that latte. You're getting this artwork. And I kind of feel that there's a play in there somewhere for scientific design where, you know, and I'm not saying beveled edges and drop shadows and everything on every, you know, just throwing the kitchen sink at everything and hoping that that's what it takes to make these things stand out. But you know what you talk about viewing in proposals on your tablet, just is music to my ears. So, you know, I may just go ahead and pirate some of those statements that you and Gary have both made because it definitely adds to my fire. So I appreciate that insight very much.
My other tip for graphics, Michael, is always ask your colorblind friend to review your graphics. Everyone has one. You might not know it, but
I never rely on color. I never rely on color to get the message across. Well, though it's colors in my diagrams, I make sure that the colors that I use are off the solids just by a little bit, because that's where the damage is. Colorblind people,
yep.
You know, they can't see red, but they can see muted red.
Just in general, having people with different visual perceptions look at graphics can be really
I don't know anybody, so I'm kind of not at a disadvantage. I just have to kind of play with that denominator is in there somewhere.
If you know 10 men, I'm pretty sure you know somebody colorblind. He just hasn't outed himself yet.
You're just not admitting it. You know, they don't wear a hat that says.
So, and I had one other question I was kind of curious about. Since you've had this early career, you know, you had it a while ago. How is that how do you feel that's impacted your career so far?
Yeah, I think it's a godsend. I mean, yeah, okay, there's lots of things you can do to propel your career, but you know, DOE is a really unique community, and my own research is really closely tied to energy like Gary's is. And so being connected to that community is really essential to me in terms of finding collaborators, knowing what's important to people. And both of those things drive my science forward because I work in an area that is highly collaborative. And so without the appropriate collaborators, I can't get projects done. But you know, over time, you do need to shift what you're focusing on to make sure it matches the priorities of the scientific community. If you're not doing new things, it's stale, right? And so being tied into what other people are interested in and what the agencies are interested in funding is really important.
It's great. So I kind of hear this really helps sort of launch a lot of your work, and especially with the DOE. Okay. Do you have any additional tips? Gary, have anything else you want to add?
Write and rewrite and get folks to look over your work and find those mentors.
All right. That sounds good. Okay. Let me just quickly return to a couple of slides here. Let's see. So just to sort of remind the viewers that I'm going to be planning another full application kickoff the first week of January, and we'll make sure we get the information out. And other than that, thank you. The slides and checklists and shell documents are available on request. Just going to email me. And with that, I'm going to wrap this up and say thank you to both Anne and Gary for being here and being able to talk. And I will stop this recording. There we go.